On the practical versus sexy Venn diagram, minivans are solidly in the practical circle. But if you want to carry 7 or 8 passengers and a whole lot of cargo behind them, you have very few options outside of minivans. You could look at something like a full-size SUV, but it's going to be a lot bigger, a lot thirstier, harder to park, and about double the price of this 2021 Honda Odyssey Elite next to me. Minivan sales have been on a slow decline over the last few years as we've seen the rise of bigger 3-row crossovers, like the Kia Telluride and the Hyundai Palisade. But there's certainly a strong argument to be made for the minivan in America. Generally speaking, minivans are going to drive a little bit more like a crossover than a full-size SUV. So the driving nature of the Honda Odyssey and the Honda Pilot aren't really too far off one another. There's certainly an argument to be made that an Odyssey may actually be a little bit better out on the road than something like a Honda Pilot. But on the other hand, the Odyssey for 2021 continues to not give customers that one thing that they seem to be asking for in a modern minivan: all-wheel drive. Also not on offer for 2021, a hybrid system or a plug-in hybrid system of any description. There were a lot of rumors out there that we might see the Accord's hybrid system repurposed for the Odyssey, but we don't see that for 2021. But there's still a lot going for the Odyssey. This is one of the most spacious models in its category. So if you're looking for the most amount of legroom, that's where the Odyssey fits in. And 2021 does bring us a number of changes. We have a real-styled front end. We have new LED headlamps. These are LED high beams and LED low beams. They're the reflector variety, so you can see the LEDs are firing from top and then projecting out front. There's also a distinctive LED accent strip in that headlight module. I was surprised to find that the turn signals, however, are incandescent up front. We do have LED fog lights down at the bottom, and then we have a strong chrome bar that connects from one side to the other. The Odyssey's design is a little unique in the Honda family. It doesn't really look like an overinflated Accord or a minivan version of the Honda Pilot. At 203.2 inches long, the Odyssey is a little bit shorter than the Chrysler Pacifica. You can really tell from the side that minivans are all about practicality. It's about giving us that large, boxy interior space with an attempt at an aerodynamic profile up front. So we have that sloping hood right there, and a very low step-in height. That's the big difference, of course, between a crossover and a minivan, is that getting into a minivan is going to be a lot easier for kids or people with mobility issues because the floor is an awful lot closer to the ground. There's less ground clearance going on. And of course, we have sliding doors that give us a big square opening to get inside. Even though this is a little bit shorter than the Chrysler Pacifica, the Odyssey gives us the most combined legroom in the minivan segment, over 119 inches of combined legroom. This is more than any crossover sold in the United States at the moment, and if you want more combined legroom than an Odyssey, you will have to look at something like a Chevy Suburban. And as big as the Odyssey seems compared to something like a Honda Pilot, the Suburban is several feet longer. 2021 is a refresh, not a redesign of the Odyssey, so the bulk of this minivan remains the same as before. They continue to hide the slide for the sliding doors really nicely right there below the third row window. As we see in most minivans, the third row window does not open, but does have this interesting style where it appears to wrap from the rear on over to the side. Let me know what you think about that in the comment section. It's worth noting that this entire back portion of the window, right from about here or so, is not actually visible from the inside. Only this section right here is the window opening for the third row. I was surprised to find that although we do have some LED accents in these tail lamp modules that look very much like the rest of the Honda lineup, that the bulk of the lights are still incandescent. So we have incandescent turn signals and incandescent brake lights back here. The Odyssey was one of the first non-luxury vehicles in America to get radar adaptive cruise control as an option. For 2021, that is standard, along with a number of other driver assistance features. Honda's forward collision warning system, their autonomous braking system, lane departure warning, and lane keeping assistance are all standard on the Odyssey for 2021, and blind spot monitoring is available. The model that we're driving has everything that Honda has to offer. For 2021, there's just one engine on offer in the Odyssey. It's a 3.5-liter naturally aspirated V6 engine, giving us 280 horsepower and 262 pound-feet of torque. The engine is mated only to a 10-speed automatic transmission for 2021. So if you didn't like the old 9-speed that used to be available in the Odyssey, don't worry, it's gone, and in its place is an in-house designed 10-speed. And this is one of my favorite new transmissions for 2020 and 2021. The issue with the German-designed 9-speed automatic transmission that they used to use in the Odyssey is that certain shifts felt a little unusual, but that has been solved with the 10-speed. It now feels very, very normal. This engine employs cylinder deactivation as well as auto start-stop to help improve fuel economy, and that gives us 28 miles per gallon out on the highway and 22 combined. However, it's worth noting that even though we get cylinder deactivation, this gives us the same average as the Chrysler Pacifica, 22, and it doesn't give us that particular feature. Of course, if you really wanted to save fuel, there are now 2 hybrids on offer in this segment. There's the plug-in hybrid Pacifica that gives us 32 miles of electric range plus 30 miles per gallon afterwards. And then there's the all-new Toyota Sienna that is promising to give us 33 miles per gallon combined. That's a pretty significant improvement over the Odyssey. If you want all-wheel drive, there are also 2 options out there. The Pacifica will give us a traditional mechanical all-wheel drive system for 2021. It cannot be combined with the hybrid, but if you want hybrid and all-wheel drive, you'll find that in the new Toyota. It has an all-wheel drive system, very, very similar to what we see in the Highlander. When it comes to front seat comfort, I'm going to give these seats 10 out of 10 points. I think that these match the Chrysler Pacifica in terms of overall comfort. We have a 4-way adjustable lumbar support for the driver's seat and a 2-position memory over there on the door. There's a tilt telescopic steering column with a pretty decent range of motion. One of the things that I love about minivans is the seating position, however. It feels much more like I'm sitting in an office chair or a dining room chair than really relaxed like you might find in some of the low-slung crossovers out there. Now, my feet aren't really tucked up underneath my leg right there, but you can see that they're pretty close as far as modern vehicles go. The base trim of the Odyssey seats 7, but most of the Odysseys you'll find on dealer lots seat 8. There's a snap-in middle seat that is for some reason missing in the model that I'm driving today, but it would go right here between these 2 captain's chair style outboard seats. Now, one thing that I don't like about this design is that the shoulder belt for the center passenger, whether we're talking about the 2nd row or the 3rd row, comes out of the ceiling. The one for the 2nd row is over here on the driver's side, and then for the 3rd row, it switches places over there to the passenger side. The downside to this design is that if you're putting a child seat right here in the center position in the 2nd row, then it can get skewed to one side, making it less comfortable for an adult that might need to sit next to them. And then, of course, there's the reality that we have this seat belt in the ceiling, and a lot of kids aren't really going to put it away properly, so it's probably just going to be left there to dangle. Since we're looking at the Elite trim, we have Honda's very comfortable Magic seats in the 2nd row. There's some armrests built in right there on each side. The shoulder belt comes out of the seat back itself. These seats slide forward and backward. You can also slide the 2 seats close together if you wanted to be closer to your child that's latched into the seat, or if you just wanted to be able to more easily access the 3rd row, you can do that from either side because you could slide them both to the left side or both to the right side and get in this way. Although it's worth noting in the Chrysler Pacifica, you can leave a child seat latched into place and tilt and slide the seat forward for easier access to the 3rd row, or of course completely collapse them into the floor. This seat moves in a few additional ways. We have a lever right here that allows you to tilt and slide the seat forward for easier access to the back. Now, you could not do that with a child seat latched into place. There's a recline lever, so that way the 2nd row person could get a little bit more comfortable, or you can fold that seat all the way forward right like that for cargo that needs to be on top of the seat without removing it from the vehicle. Of course, bear in mind that the Chrysler Pacifica would allow you to fold and tumble the 2nd row completely into the floor, unless we're talking about the hybrid model. Then the seats move in a very similar manner to these. And lastly, we have a lever up front, which allows you to completely remove the 2nd row seat from the vehicle. Now, I suppose you could use this to tilt the seat forward to get into the 3rd row, leaving a child seat latched into place, but the latch simply wasn't designed that way. It was designed just to be removed from the vehicle. As with most minivans, the seats are pretty heavy, so for some people this may be a 2-person task, but more of a factor for me is that the carrier that enables that Magic seat functionality stays attached to the floor when the seat has been removed, so we don't have a completely flat load floor here. On the other hand, we do have an enormous 3rd row. The 2nd row seat is all the way back in its tracks, and I still have about 2 inches of legroom left. This is a very, very spacious 3rd row, and I have about 1.5 inches of headroom left. If you want this kind of room, you'll only find it in really big SUVs, and something like a Chevy Suburban may still not have a 3rd row that's quite as comfortable as the average minivan because the seats are often a little closer to the ground. The boxy profile of the Odyssey allowed them to give us a 3rd row bench that's a little bit higher off the ground, making it more comfortable for adults if they have to sit back here. Now, this is a 3-position bench, but it's pretty wide because, again, the back of this vehicle was designed to accommodate 4x-sheet goods. However, like the 2nd row seat, we again have the shoulder belt coming right there out of the ceiling. Helping keep the kids happy back here, we have a headphone port on each side, a 12-volt power port on one side, USB charge-only port on the other, and then air vents on either side. There's also a roller shade well integrated into the side. Of course, the reality is that even with modern minivans, the 3rd row may spend a decent amount of its time folded, so the plastics back here are still pretty hard, just as you'd expect out of more of a cargo-focused area. And the 3rd row seats are not leather upholstered like the 2nd and 1st row. Instead, these have an imitation leather upholstery. But Honda still gives us 2 sets of latch anchors, one for each of the outboard seats, and then top tether anchors for all 3 seat positions. When it comes to cargo capacity, Chrysler's minivans have a trick up their sleeve. In front of the 2nd row seats, there's a large storage area because the 2nd row seats fold into the floor as well as the 3rd row seats. In this area, Honda gives us a storage compartment right there, but it's not used for seats, it's used for the spare tire. So you can have the vacuum and the spare tire at the same time, but the 2nd row seats don't fold into the floor. Outside of a full-size van or perhaps a moving truck, there are very few vehicles that can compete with a minivan in terms of cargo practicality. Behind the third row seats, we find 32.8 cubic feet of storage space. That's a very, very large cargo area, and again, behind the third row seats. Most three-row crossovers out there will give you perhaps 9 to 20 cubic feet of storage space if you're lucky behind the third row, but minivans give you an absolutely enormous area. Now, this is still a little bit smaller than the current generation Toyota Sienna. That tops the charts at 39.1 cubic feet, but we don't know what the new generation Sienna that's going to be coming in the next few months is going to give us in terms of cargo capacity. I wouldn't be surprised if it shrank slightly because a number of recent Toyota redesigns have actually reduced the interior volume. In addition to being very large, the cargo area is very practical because this cargo area is just over 4 feet wide. It's sized so that way you could put 4x8 sheet goods, pieces of plywood, school supplies, whatever, easily inside the minivan. If you remove all the seats, those 4x8 goods could be all the way in the vehicle, but you could stick some very large things inside the minivan and still have some folks in the second row seat. We also have a cargo area that is very deep. You can see that you could put a lot of luggage right here, even below the load floor, and the load floor is notably lower to the ground than many crossovers out there. So it's going to make loading that cargo easier as well. Honda was eager to tell me that although another company offers an integrated vacuum system, Honda was the first with the integrated Honda Vac. Now, there is a 120-volt inverter up front, so if you were interested in doing pandemic Floby haircuts, it is possible, but only up here in the front because there's no 120-volt inverter in the rear. Although I suppose it makes sense because this is where we find the vanity mirror. The reason for the extremely deep cargo well is that the third row seats fold completely into that cargo well, giving you almost a completely flat load floor from that opening. As we look around inside, keep in mind that we are in the top-end Elite trim. We have a pretty standard-sized moonroof right there over the driver and front passengers' heads. There's no enormous panoramic moonroof in the ceiling, but we do have a rear seat entertainment system. It's a single screen system, however, rather than the dual screen system that we find in some of the competition. The driver and front passenger have height adjustable shoulder belts and two-way adjustable headrests. And from this angle, you can see the controls for the third zone of the automatic climate control system, the one for the rear seats. It's back there in the ceiling. The leather upholstery is perforated because the front seats are both heated and ventilated in this particular trim. We have pretty minor bolstering on the seat bottom and back cushions, so they should be just fine if you're a larger person. Similar to the rear seats, on the inboard side of the driver and front passenger seat, we have a ratchet-style armrest. The front doors are made from a combination of hard and soft touch plastics. We have a soft touch upper section of the door, soft touch armrest right there, and a little insert behind it that's also soft, but the rest of the front door panel is all cast from hard plastics. That is going to make the panels more durable. The door also features a number of nooks and crannies for storage. You can see that we have a storage area right there under that armrest, and then there's one at the bottom of the door that's integrated with the bottle holder. The two-tone theme continues as we move over to the dashboard. We have a soft-touch injection molded mid-section of the dashboard. The very far end of the dashboard is hard plastic. We then have sort of an imitation wood trim here. I'm not entirely sure if this is supposed to be imitating wood or brushed metal. Either way, it's an interesting touch. And then below that, we have some ambient lighting that's a little bit difficult to show, but I'll put a clip in here if I can get a clip when it's a little bit darker. We then have a soft touch accent strip in brown matching the seats, and then a pretty decently sized glove box. This is a bin style. On the downside, I was not able to fit a larger tablet computer inside because it's a little bit longer versus tall. In the middle of the dashboard, we have the available touchscreen infotainment system. The base infotainment system in the Odyssey is a relatively small 5-inch screen. The model that we're driving has this larger screen, and then you'll find the controls for the 3-zone climate control below that. This is one of Honda's newest software packages, so in addition to smartphone integration, we also have features like the cabin watch system, so there's a camera view so you can actually see what's going on in the back. There's also an intercom style system, so that way you can talk with the rear passengers, cabin talk right there, and you can route that through the rear headphones if they're using the headphones for the system. We also have the ability to interact with the rear seat entertainment system, so for instance I can enable or disable the remote control from the rear if your kids are fighting over it. I have a shortcut over here to the cabin talk system. You can also pull up the app integration for the rear seat system. We don't have as many apps as are available in the Chrysler Pacifica, but we do have, for instance, that how much further icon right there that will integrate with the nav system and tell kids how much longer they have to wait. There's also streaming applications that you can enable or disable. Below the climate controls, we find the engine start-stop button, the controls for the heated and ventilated seats, Honda's Hunt and Peck style shifter. Let me know what you think about this shifter down there. We have buttons up top, park, and then we push that down for reverse, right like that. Push that one in for neutral, this one for drive, and then toggle it again for sport. Park is that button right up there. auto start, stop, enable, disable button, snow button, econ button, and then the hazard light button right over there. Below the shifter is a Blu-ray optical disc player. We also have some USB charge-only ports, a 110-volt inverter port, and then a large area where you can store bags, groceries, that sort of thing, 2 decently sized cup holders, and then a Qi wireless charging mat in the center console. Since minivans are all about practicality, 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 we have a big storage area right there with this roller cover. It doesn't go as far back as I would have hoped, but you could definitely fit a gallon of milk in there if you wanted to. There's some additional USB ports in there, and then cup holders for the rear passengers. The instrument cluster features a large central display and then 2 physical dials, one for the engine temperature and one for the fuel level. This display is not as configurable as some LCD displays, but we do have access to certain apps like our trip computer readouts, phone interface, navigation turn-by-turn directions, infotainment readouts, the vehicle's maintenance history, and of course there are a few settings that you can configure here as well. The steering wheel is a 4-spoke design, and kind of a surprise for a minivan, we have paddle shifters on the back, up on the right and then down on the left. On the right side of the steering wheel, we have the controls for the radar adaptive cruise control system, as well as the steering wheel heater button. And then on the left side, we have the controls for the infotainment system. These controls also double to control that multifunction LCD right there. We hit that home button and then you can toggle around with the options. Thanks to the 10-speed automatic transmission being standard across the lineup in the Odyssey, 0 to 60 times should be at least 7 seconds. If you get the base version of the Odyssey, I suspect it might be a little bit quicker because it's lighter, but this one came in at 7 seconds even. In the 60 to 0 braking test, it took 130 feet for this vehicle to stop from 60 miles an hour back to 0. Remember that the average minivan is going to be heavier than some of those larger 3-row crossovers out there. The added weight certainly impacts handling versus some of those 3-row crossovers out there, but remember that the weight happens a little bit lower in the vehicle, and we have lower ground clearance in most minivans versus crossovers out there, and that's why this really isn't going to feel that much removed from something like a Honda Pilot. Now, obviously the Honda Pilot can have super handling all-wheel drive, and that will make a handling difference, but when we're talking about front-wheel drive Pilot to Honda Odyssey, they're actually not going to be that far off one another in terms of handling ability on the road. When it comes to handling ability, I'm going to give this model an A. I think it beats the Chrysler Pacifica just by a hair, although we haven't driven the new 2021 Pacifica. It has been refreshed for 2021, and it now gets all-wheel drive, which is kind of an interesting twist. I also think this beats the Kia Sedona by just a little bit. The Sedona does not have quite as elegant of a rear suspension design as this model seems to in terms of handling some of those more broken road surfaces or rougher road surfaces. But the Sedona does tend to feel a little bit more like a crossover. They've also tried to design it a little bit more like a crossover, which is also something a little bit different than normal in this segment. Out on a rougher road surface like the one that we're on here, you'll certainly notice that we're in the Elite trim. We have lower profile tires than we find in the base version of the Odyssey, and I think the ride quality suffers as a result. Now, the lower profile tires probably have a slight impact on the handling ability of the Odyssey, which I again think is good for the minivan segment, but I suspect I would get the lower profile tires if I had the option. Overall, I give this version of the Odyssey a B when it comes to the ride score. When you start pushing the Odyssey a little bit harder in corners, you'll notice that the rear suspension tends to get a little bit more upset than some of the other minivans, especially when the Odyssey is empty. Now, if it's full, then it's obviously going to behave a little bit differently because the suspension is going to be a bit more compressed, but a lot of folks are going to be driving the Odyssey around with just a few people in it sometimes. When it comes to cabin noise, I'm going to give this model a B. It came in at 72 decibels, which is just a little bit louder than the last Chrysler Pacifica we tested. Keep in mind there are some new Pacifica models for 2021 as well. They're giving us an absolute range-topping model that promises to be a little bit quieter, but again, we haven't driven that model yet. I'm simply talking about the last Pacifica that we drove. It was a little bit quieter. Over a week of mixed driving, I've averaged almost exactly 22 miles per gallon. So this is right in line with what the EPA says it should be getting. It's also exactly in line with the last Chrysler Pacifica V6 that I drove. But it's worth noting that if you want better fuel economy in a minivan, there are again 2 options out there. The last Chrysler Pacifica we drove delivered easily over 30 miles per gallon in mixed driving, and of course it has a plug-in range as well, so you can drive over 30 miles in pure EV mode. That will have a significant impact on your cost of operation. It's going to be several $100s less a year to operate, especially if you can plug in, or you can plug in at work where you can charge for free. And if you want to save even more, there is the upcoming Toyota hybrid minivan. It's going to get 33 miles per gallon. I suspect that that model will also get near 40 miles per gallon in steady state highway cruising if you're gentle on it, very much like we see in the Toyota Highlander. That new hybrid Toyota minivan is going to have exactly the same hybrid system that we find in the Highlander with the optional e-all-wheel drive rear axle. E-all-wheel drive systems are generally not as capable as mechanical systems, but it's certainly going to be more capable than not having any power on the rear axle at all. bottom lining the Odyssey out on the road is honestly pretty easy. A lot of folks think that minivans drive like boat anchors or enormous marshmallows, but that's not really the case. Driving dynamics in the average minivan aren't really that far removed from closely related crossovers in the respective manufacturer's lineup. So this is not really going to be that far removed from the Honda Pilot, which is relatively closely related to this, and the Sienna is not that far removed from the Toyota Highlander in its particular generation. Yes, minivans tend to be a little bit heavier than some of those crossover counterparts, but the difference is not really going to be that big. The Honda Odyssey has certainly been climbing up the sales charts lately, and I think it's easy to see why. In 2019, although FCA sold more vans than Honda did, it was split between old and new, hybrid and non-hybrid as well. But for 2021, FCA is giving us a Voyager and a Pacifica rather than the older Grand Caravan and a Pacifica. Essentially what they've decided to do there is keep the old front end look on the Pacifica and sell it as a Voyager and make a lower trim level, and then have the new front end and new interior designs on the model called Pacifica. But probably the most important thing to know for 2021 is that there are going to be some pretty big changes in the minivan market. Not only are we getting the Voyager and a refreshed Pacifica, we're also getting an all-wheel drive Pacifica, and we're getting a hybrid-only brand new Toyota Sienna, and then tossed into all of that mix, Kia has decided to redesign the Sedona as well. So bear in mind that at this point in time, I have not driven the Toyota Sienna for 2021, so we'll be talking about the 2020 Sienna, the older current model, the one that you can buy today. Same thing with the Pacifica, we'll be talking about the one you can buy today, but the new one's coming up very soon, and again, the same thing with the Sedona. The Odyssey is more expensive than most of the entries in this segment, starting at $31,790 for the LX. If you want key features like CarPlay, keyless entry, and the Magic Slide second row, they'll set you back $35,190. If you want leather upholstery and a power hatch, and a lot of folks seem to want those features in their minivan, that'll start at $38,460. If you want the cabin cameras and the intercom system, $42,500. And if you want the Honda vacuum, premium audio, and everything that we were driving today, you want the Elite trim for $47,820. When comparing prices in these segments, remember that generally speaking, Toyota and Honda are going to sell an awful lot closer to MSRP than the Chrysler Voyager or the Chrysler Pacifica. At this point in time, the Pacifica has some pretty massive deals on it. With that out of the way, let's dive into the competition. For some reason, Honda does not see the second best-selling minivan lineup in America, or formerly the best-selling minivan lineup in America, as direct competition. They see the Toyota Sienna as direct competition. Let me know what you think about that in the comment section. Personally, I think it's a little bit silly to talk about minivans without talking about the company that really created the modern minivan. The Sienna was refreshed not too long ago, but it didn't really get major changes. The big selling point for the Sienna is reliability. It's proved to be more reliable than the Odyssey, and up until this year, it was the only minivan available in America with all-wheel drive. Fuel economy for the Sienna is decent for a minivan. It's not as good in real-world driving as the Odyssey, and honestly, the Odyssey outclasses the Sienna in pretty much every way, unless you wanted a Toyota minivan, and that's what the Sienna is for. Next up, we have the Pacifica and the Voyager. Again, the Voyager is the decontented Pacifica for 2020. For 2021, that will continue, and we'll get the refreshed front end on the Pacifica. So it's going to look a little bit more perhaps like a Chrysler 300, a little bit less like the Voyager, so that way there's some differentiation there. The Voyager starts at $26,985. That's the one with the older bumper design, only 7 seats, and only in basic trims. If you want more options, then you're gonna have to move up into the Pacifica, which will start at $34,045. But of course, in reality, there's always about $3,000 to $5,000 off of the Pacifica when you hop over to the Chrysler dealer. I took a look at their website right before I was shooting this video, and not only was there $3,000 off, there's an additional $5,000 in bonus cash if you lease or finance your Pacifica with Chrysler. So significant discounts any way you slice it. The Pacifica or the Voyager are going to be less expensive than a comparably priced Odyssey. The Pacifica has a reasonable amount going for it. There are a lot of practical features, especially the second row that allows you to leave child seats latch into place or fold them completely flat into the floor. Reliability has never exactly been Chrysler's strong point, but remember, the 9-speed automatic transmission that we find in the Voyager and in the Pacifica is the same 9-speed that we had in the Odyssey last year. Making things even more confusing in the FCA minivan lineup, there is a Pacifica with all-wheel drive for 2020, but it is not the new Pacifica with all-wheel drive. They decided to jam the all-wheel drive system under the old model for 1 year for $40,240. But again, there's tons of cash off. So if you want an all-wheel drive minivan at this exact moment, you now have 2 options, the Sienna with all-wheel drive or the Voyager with all-wheel drive. In this particular comparison, I would probably take the Pacifica with all-wheel drive. There are fewer interior compromises for the all-wheel drive system. We still somehow magically have these second-row seats that fold flat into the floor. FCA was able to design the drive shaft in a way that it didn't interfere with the second-row seat functionality. And of course, if you want a hybrid minivan at this exact moment, there is the hybrid Pacifica. And even next year, if you want a plug-in hybrid minivan, there's only going to be one option. It's the Chrysler minivan. That'll give you about 30 miles of range, 260 horsepower total, and decent fuel economy after that hybrid range has been exhausted. Definitely above the average minivan in this segment, whether or not you ever plug that minivan in. It's not as swift as some of the other V6 options, but after some initial teething troubles, that Pacifica hybrid has proved to be pretty reliable. The key thing to know about that is that the second row seats don't fold flat into the floor because that's where the battery's located. To be honest, if I were minivan shopping in America right now and I didn't need all-wheel drive, the Pacifica Hybrid is probably the model that I would get. A lot of that has to do with the pricing. At $39,995 starting, plus absolutely massive discounts on it and federal tax credits, it is going to be significantly less expensive than the Odyssey, and oddly enough, thanks to the tax credits, it could also be less than the Chrysler Voyager, which is theoretically the discount minivan. The next minivan up is the Kia Sedona. For 2021, it remains the same. It's going to start at $30,400, so notably less expensive than the Odyssey. It also has a longer standard warranty. With this generation of the Sedona, Kia was trying to give us a crossover-ish minivan. So they decided to not have the second row seats removed from the vehicle, which didn't make a lot of sense to me, honestly, the last time I drove the Sedona. It seems like the one selling point of the minivan, in my mind at least, is the ability to take out all the seats and use it as an enormous cargo carrier if you needed to. It's what makes minivans so incredibly practical, but you can't do that in the Sedona. You can stick 4x-something sheet goods in there because the seats collapse forward against the front row seats. They just don't come absolutely out, meaning that some of that larger cargo may be hanging out the rear. But the Sedona is definitely inexpensive, and it's trying to be a little bit more crossover-y. Now that's going to be doubled down on for 2022. The 2022 model year vehicle, which is what we should be seeing in about 6 months from the time that this video is published, is going even further down the crossover rabbit hole in terms of interior, exterior styling, and the feature set as well. But the important omission for some reason is still all-wheel drive. The Sedona has proved to be an inexpensive, reliable family hauler. There are a few compromises in terms of practicality, but it does have a very long standard warranty and excellent reliability. So it's definitely a strong option in this segment. If you're looking at the Honda or the Sienna especially, and you're interested in reliability, you want something other than a Chrysler Voyager or Chrysler Pacifica, the Sedona is definitely a great option. When it comes to what I would describe as the American minivan, there are really just these four options. Then we have some alternatives that you might be shopping, like a Ford Transit Connect. It is notably smaller inside and outside than these minivans. It's not quite the same thing either. And then we have the Mercedes Metris, which is about the same size, but it's rear-wheel drive. It's significantly less powerful, and it really has more of a utilitarian mission. The Metris was brought to the United States for cargo carrying duty, and then they happened to sell a passenger version of the Metris. But this is not the minivan from Mercedes that most Europeans are thinking of. They're thinking of the V-Class, which roughly has a Mercedes-Benz C-Class style interior grafted into the minivan. Is a very different vehicle. It's much more of a luxury minivan. It feels like a passenger car. It feels Mercedes normal, whereas the Metris definitely feels like a cargo van that's been converted for passenger duty. It's just not quite the same thing. Bottom lining the minivan segment at the moment I think is pretty easy, but keep in mind we're going to see some pretty big minivan changes coming up over the next 6 months, so stay tuned for some of those updated videos. The Odyssey does really well when it comes to feeling a little bit more modern, feeling fresher than most of the other minivans. It has a good reliability reputation in general terms. There was a bit of a hiccup with the 9-speed automatic transmission that they had in there and some transmission issues in the past that seem to be mostly behind Honda. But the one area that I wish Honda would really work on is child seat friendliness. It is definitely very, very handy to be able to leave your child seats latched into the second row seats and tilt and slide them forward to be able to get into the third row. It's not as critical with the minivan as it is with the crossover that has a much narrower door opening and isn't quite as big, isn't quite as long as a minivan, but it's still more convenient and easier to get into the third row in the Voyager or in the Pacifica. And of course, even though there have been a ton of rumors about a potential hybrid Odyssey, we don't have one at the moment, so if you want a hybrid, you're going to need to look elsewhere. Now, going forward for 2022, this landscape could change pretty dramatically because the Sienna is promising easily the best fuel economy in this segment. We have the updated Voyager with a ton of new infotainment technologies coming to it, and we have that redesigned Sedona as well. So be sure and stay tuned because I'll have those videos to you just as soon as I can get my hands on them. Hit that subscribe button down there at the bottom of your screen. If you haven't already done so, be sure and head over to facebook.com/AlexNautos to see what we're driving this week. And you can also head over to Instagram to see the lighter side of things. I'll see all of you next week.